The CBD is still
It might relative to then it'll just carry on through many
Turn all the noise off the phone.
just all blocked off.
Can't take anywhere else through there.
Anyway.
Half the streets are blocked off. It's really quite.
Okay, so we'll open the meeting and
Is there enough of us?
I'll move the apologies for Councillor Newman and Member Honeck for absence on council business, for Councillor Filipina, and apologies from Councillor Collins, Lee and AMSB Chair Tybury for lateness. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Simpson. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. Any declarations of interest? There are no declarations. The confirmation of the minutes from the 1st of June. If someone could
I'll move
do
those.
that. Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Darby. Thank you. No changes, no corrections. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? There are none against. Petitions, there are none. Public input, none. Local board input, none. Extraordinary items, none that are no. Notice of motion, none. And now we have John Bishop, Treasurer. Item number 9, review of the diversified financial assets portfolio. John?
Yes, good morning. Through you, Chair, so just a bit of background. So this is a fund of stocks and bonds and cash. We received approval to divest 100 million in the 2016-17, so this current financial year, and to divest a further 100 million in the next financial year, 2017-18. This will leave the fund at around 130 million. This paper is seeking to fully divest those funds. Now this asset, it's a non-strategic asset. The divestment is consistent with the professional advice that we received from Cameron Partners and Ernst & Young in the reports. So essentially what we're doing is, I guess, exchanging those funds for cash, and that cash can be used to be invested in infrastructure. So essentially you can look at it in two ways. One is it will reduce debt, or secondly we will simply use those funds to invest in infrastructure. The cost of administering the fund every year, direct costs around about 1.5 million per annum. There's also indirect costs as far as staff time and things like that. The expected return in the long run is around 7% per annum, so it does slightly exceeds our long run expected cost of funds due to different risk nature of the assets we're investing in. A long-term expected cost of funds will be around 5.5–6%. So happy to take any questions.
Happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Casey.
Read your report very carefully. Could you give me some of the benefits of keeping the fund, please? Seems to be missing from your report.
Through you, Chair, I mean, the one benefit of keeping the fund is it does form part of our liquidity, so a backstop facility, although it's fair to say that the most common way to do that with large organisations would be to have an additional or a bank standby facility, which would be a more efficient and simpler from an administration point of view. But it does form part of our liquidity.
And any other reasons why we should hold on to it? It's just that I felt your report was supporting the divestment, and normally we would have both sides of the argument.
Again, through you, Chair, look, this is just clearly an asset which is non-strategic to Council. It doesn't help us deliver services that we're required to deliver. Again, it's quite unusual for an organisation with such significant debt to have on the opposite side an extensive investment.
Sorry, I was asking for arguments in support of keeping it.
There are very few.
You've given me one. I'm looking for another one.
Struggling, leave him.
Through you, Chair, I am struggling to give you any more rationale for why we should
That's
keep
an
it.
honest answer.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I'll give you some. Okay, well, John, I'll give it.
Councillor Walker, Wayne.
Sure. If we look at the performance of the fund over time, and I'm referring to the performance to date, how has the fund assisted us in our ability to raise debt? because of the revenue that we've got from the fund and the relationship with the council's debt to revenue ratio.
Again, through you, Chair, the existence of the fund hasn't helped us raise debt. In fact, because of the fund, we've had to raise more debt than we would otherwise have had if we didn't have the fund. So when the rating agencies look at this, the only benefit they give the fund is that it assists our liquidity, but also they give that a haircut. What I mean by that is that if an event was to happen, things like stocks and bonds are likely to be difficult to sell, so they won't give it the same amount of liquidity credit, for want of a better expression, than they would, say, for a pure standby facility or just having cash in the bank on call or in government bonds. So it hasn't assisted our credit rating.
Let me express it another way. Has it assisted our ability to raise debt, given that there's a better ratio of revenue to debt than we would otherwise get?
Through you, Chair, no, the ratio of revenue to debt isn't significantly impacted on a material scale by having this portfolio. At the end of the day, it's a negative, that ratio, because at the end of the day, the debt is arguably, when this portfolio was 330 million higher than it needed to be. The revenue, when it was 330 million, assuming an average return of 7%, which is a long-run expected return, was about 23 million.
And John, the cost of the debt,
Wayne.
the equivalent amount of debt that we were paying the interest on would have been, what, 5 or 6%? So net, what, 1%?
Through you, Chair, give or take 1%, yeah, approximately.
So approximately.
And that reflects the fact that because we're investing in assets which are, I guess, riskier than investing in council debt, you would expect that return to be higher over the long run. That's a simple risk-return trade-off.
Matthew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was just another clarification about something
sorry,
in the report.
just Matthew first, Kat.
Sorry, I thought I had
Right.
Kathy, sorry.
It's all right, through the chair, just to Councillor Walker's question as well. So on the revenue, and the credit rating agencies look through this, just remember there's actually two components. So there's dividend streams coming through from the portfolio and interest receipts in terms of bond investments, but a large amount of the revenue comes back via forecast and assumed capital gain on share investments through time. So when the credit rating agencies think about our debt to revenue ratio, they don't look at that as hard cash revenue. You see what I'm saying? So actually the cash revenue coming off the portfolio is pretty modest, probably a little bit below our cost of debt. But what you're assuming here, and John's made the point, over long periods, you're typically talking about a decade or two when you're thinking about safe equity investing, you've got a level of capital gain coming through as well that can be realised through time. But in terms of how our debt to revenue ratios work, it's very hard to factor in that non-cash revenue into the equation.
I have Councillor Holst, Darby, Casey, Mike Lee and Councillor Fletcher.
So just a quick question, Mr Chair, and also just checking I've got it right. So in essence, the whole issue turns on, there are benefits in the portfolio, but they are outweighed by the opportunities foregone should we pay off debt, is in essence what I think we're saying.
Yes, through Chair, that's a good way to think about it. It's the opportunity cost of maintaining this fund means we arguably can't build some of the infrastructure that Auckland Council needs.
Okay, so we will hear, I'm sure, in the debate, Mr Chair, a lot about the so-called rainy day fund, and I'll speak to this in the debate. I think the rainy day is here. Should a rainy day event happen, however, can you just remind me what our call-in, the sum that's available via call-in? I think we were given the figure about 800 million that's available should the issues or need arise.
So through Chair, I think you're referring to the standby bank lines we have.
Yep.
Yeah, at the moment they're 900 million,
900.
with including water care as well. That'll grow to about 1.2 billion of available bank facilities going forward.
So I think that's a really important figure, Mr Chair, that just over 1 billion is available as a standby facility. Let's not lose sight of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. So we're still on questions. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, just following up on that point. So for me, I'm comfortable with the recommendation, subject to just some explanation on paragraphs 28 to 30, the liquidity support. For me, that's the critical caveat. So just in terms of that, the DFAP is part of that liquidity support, and it reinforces that or offers support to that Treasury function, but and it contributes to that overall calculation for liquidity. So at paragraph 30, we note that, or you note that some additional liquidity may be required in the future. You've just pointed out that the standby facility has increased from $800 to $900 million. Is that additional liquidity provided through the standby fund, or can it be further provided for through the standby fund?
Through
Facility, sorry.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, we can provide that additional liquidity support through an increased standby or back committed line.
Okay, so that's where we're covered in terms of liquidity support, which by pulling this fund, we're beefing up our standby facility to protect us going forward.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Casey.
John, I just wanted you to comment on, you've attached an excerpt from Cameron Partners' report, and I'm looking at our page 17, and it's a sentence from Cameron Partners that I'd like you to just expand on. It says here, the rationale for holding the DFAP look even weaker than the rationale for holding AIAL shares, which is our airport shareholding, which assumes then that our rationale for holding the airport shares is weak. Can you just comment on that? Because it's part of you've placed this before us today.
Through you, Chair, I think Cameron Partners would run a similar argument with the airport shares. They would argue that, again, for council to provide its core services, they would argue that holding a 22.3 or 22.4% stake in the airport isn't necessary to achieve those outcomes, and in fact selling that stake or selling down that stake to maybe 10%, council could use those additional funds to invest in infrastructure, which is a core service which council needs to provide.
So as our council advisor, what do you make of that in terms of, is it a weak argument, as they suggest, to hold AIAL shares?
We'll let John answer that, but Councillor Casey, remember we're not discussing that.
I know, but he's
investment.
placed this before us, it's part of the public record, and I'm questioning that.
Yep, but then it is a Cameron Partners report.
And he's put it before us
Yeah,
today.
through you, Chair. I mean, Cameron Partners' arguments, are similar to what they're arguing for the DFAP. They're not core to council delivering its objectives. Given our balance sheet is constrained, we're better to use our funds to supply services that the private sector isn't going to provide. What they'd argue is that our holding in the airport, we don't have a great deal of influence over the airport. There's no magic in 22.3%. You could argue there's more sense in 10.1 since it's a blocking stake.
And my question through the chair wasn't about what Cameron Partners think, it was about what you, as our financial advisor, think of what Cameron Partners are telling us today here in this report, that we have a weak argument for holding Auckland Airport shares.
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Yep,
Point of
we're
order.
just
I
gonna-
think we're moving somewhat away from the agenda item. What we're being asked to look at this diversified portfolio, and that's the line of question I think that should occur, rather than what might happen, some speculation about the airport.
Totally agree with you.
With respect,
Totally agree.
the
No,
officer placed this
Councillor
before
Casey,
us
Councillor Ca-
today,
yeah,
and it
Councillor
mentions
Casey.
the DFAP in the same sentence as Auckland Airport shares and our weak
know.
rationale for holding them.
They're quoting Cameron in the thing. Now, John can answer the
PAY,
question,
anyway.
but in relation to the diversified investment portfolio only at this stage. John?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I totally support the Cameron Partners' recommendation as far as the DFAP.
Councillor Lee, Mike.
Thank you. Can you tell us how much is the average rate of interest the council is paying on debt?
So I think the question was the average rate we're paying on debt. I mean, the average cost of funds right now is roughly, call it 5.5%, give or take. The marginal cost is slightly lower than that.
Simon Allen, who was the former chair of Auckland Council Investments Limited, did oppose the transfer of this fund from Auckland Council Investments Limited. As we are aware, his point is that selling assets which have earned 9.1% per annum, even in the wake of the GFC, to repay debt, which is 4.5%, is destroying value. What's your comment on that?
Through you, Chair, I mean, that return, which is the return since inception, so it's after the GFC, when the markets did remarkably well. Look, we can come up with a number of investment opportunities which, over the long run, are likely to have a return which exceeds Auckland Council's cost of debt. That's because they have a greater risk element. The reality is we're balance sheet constrained, and also it's not our core business.
That's right.
Can I ask a supplementary, Mr. Chairman? In those early years and in the wake of the GFC, which overshadowed the start of the Super City, the fund under Auckland Council Investments Limited earned 9.1%. Over the last year since this council has taken over, it's earned 5.8%. Can you explain that?
Yeah, through you, Chair, yes, I can. I think this is a point, Councillor, you made before. Look, the answer is that we manage the portfolio in exactly the same manner in which Auckland Council Investment Limited managed it. So the same investment advisor, the same range of fund managers. So the return simply reflects the market returns. If you look at our benchmark, which is effectively an index, the return of the fund, because it is so well diversified, has matched the benchmark return of the index within 0.1 or 0.2% over the course of its history. So the fact that the portfolio management has shifted from ACIL to council has not in any way impacted the quality of returns upwards or downwards.
Well, they have gone down mysteriously, and there's meant to be, I understand, a Trump bump in the American economy where much of this investment is. Could it be that the elements of the fund that have already been stripped out were more high-earning parts of the fund? Could that be an answer to the strange discrepancy between 9.1 and 5.8 since the council took over?
Through you, Chair, I think you just need to go back to the benchmark and index returns, which you'll find are not as high as they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's the same answer you've given twice. Do you want to say anything, Matthew?
Yeah, look, through the Chair, so what the Treasurer has said is there is no mystery. So he's explained the returns in regards to a well-understood practice around the investment management industry, and that's discussion around indexing and benchmarks. So there's nothing mysterious there. The point that's been made is the return available from markets in the last couple of years has been lower than it was in the 3 years prior to that.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if you could give us a brief history to this fund.
A brief history to this fund? Through you, Chair, look, I can't give a substantive history. I've only been at council coming up 3 years, but I understand it's related to funds of a prior body to Auckland Council, I think from the sale of some assets. And those assets were invested in stocks and bonds and cash, and that's grown over time.
So maybe I can assist. 20 years ago exactly, there was a recognition that there was an infrastructure deficit in Auckland, and there was a very hard fought for battle to establish Infrastructure Auckland. And these funds have grown out of that. And I would suggest that if you go back to the purpose of those funds that enabled the North Shore Busway, And a lot of the public transport we have now, you might care to give careful consideration to how we use them going into the future, because they were intended to address the infrastructure deficit that Auckland had 20 years ago and continues to have.
Through you, Chair, I think that's exactly what these funds are earmarked for, is infrastructure spend in Auckland.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to labour that point, but it's the point on which I resigned as a Minister of Cabinet, because these funds were going to be given away at the time, and so I've taken a very close interest in these funds because I could see that Auckland would require them.
Where did they come from?
Just to reinforce John's answer there, so if you look at paragraph number 6, the first sentence, so let's be quite clear. Money, if delivered, will reduce debt, will enable us to make greater investment in infrastructure.
And the purpose of those funds at the time were for public transport and stormwater.
And we're trying to
But we
keep it
need the
going.
money.
Thank you for reminding us of that, Councillor Fletcher. We're trying to keep it going as best we can
All right.
with the further investment. So we've got anything else, Councillor Fletcher?
No,
No
that,
question.
I'm happy to participate in the debate, but I just wanted, I think it is important we actually understand the history to things at times, otherwise we tend to take them for granted.
History is a great teacher.
It is.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Can you just confirm, as well as the benefits that are outlined in the report from the sale of the proceeds, if that goes ahead, that we're also saving ourselves $1.5 million in administering this fund, which we pay out to somebody else on top of the staff time?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
Councillor Cooper.
Are we questions or debate?
Still questions, but
I'm happy to
you're
move it
last,
so
you're
we
la-
can debate it. No, I don't have a question, but I just put my hand up because the line will be long.
It's moved by Councillor Simpson. You're seconding, but you're now first off the rank.
Thank you. For me, if you do look at page 17, it's not Cameron's comment, it's EY with the yellow pages. And if you look at it, we talk about rainy day. It talks about the fact that if we wait for a rainy day in a global sense, our shares won't be worth much. And for me, I'm very jittery about the global markets. We've got Germany's election coming up. We don't know what's going to happen there. We've got a new France. We don't know what's going to happen there. America, goodness knows what's going to happen there. England, we don't know what's going to happen there. And most of these shares are international shares. I think we're probably going to get one of the best prices now. It's already reduced slightly. I don't think we wait for a global shock to sell, because we will actually lose huge amounts of money. And I'm really glad to hear Councillor Fletcher talk about public transport and stormwater, because those are the very issues we're grappling with. So thank you for fighting for that fund, Councillor Fletcher. So now we can use it. But I do, I really take on board, and as I did at the time when we had those reports done, we need this money, and also with the 2.5% rates increase that we passed and will finally pass at the end of the month, we don't have a lot of room for borrowing. So we do need to release some funds so we can borrow to do the things we need to do. And I think Aucklanders expect us to keep building things. That's what we do. Building pipes, building roads for all the houses that everybody's screaming out for and are being built. So for me, it's so important. And we spent a lot of money on those reports, but they needed to be done, absolutely. But now we need to use them as a template for going forward. So for me, I absolutely support this. I want us to be able to borrow. I want us to pay down debt, and I want us to then be able to have room to borrow again. And I feel confident that if we did have some sort of catastrophe where we needed a lot of money in a hurry, we've got that facility. So I think we're probably doing the best thing we can do right now, and we're managing the risk as best we can. So I want to thank you for having this brought forward, Mr Chairman and Mr Mayor, that you've got the appetite for this, because I think it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. When I read this agenda item, I kind of think of the Scottish miners who during the Thatcher years, in the closing down of the coal industry, received quite a number of, for them anyway, were big redundancy payments. And in a number of instances, those redundancy payments ended up going over the bar in a very short space of time. So some of the men got quite substantial payments, and in a very short time, they were gone. And then they faced the rather bleak prospect of literally decades of unemployment with nothing to sustain them and their families. We have got this fund here, which as recently as last year was valued at $355 million. It had returned an average of 9.6% per annum since 2012, and it was managed to enable a drawdown of $23 million a year. And when I think of just a few weeks ago, the great furore and difficulty over trying to recoup 13 million, just a little over 13 million, via the targeted rate, and here we have a fund, a facility that gives us nearly double that, and we're looking to flick it on. We've already flicked about a third of it off, but we're looking to finish off the job today. And that fund had been managed previously by, as Councillor Lee mentioned, Auckland Council Investments Limited. And if you look at some of their prospectuses, if you go back and look at a few of those prospectuses over the last few years, they present quite a different story of this fund and investment generally. In terms of investments, their assets, they increased the asset value when they were managing all these funds and the other investments from over 1.5 billion to 2.4 billion. Time they'd paid out 244 million of dividends and just over 50 million from investment portfolio. So by anyone's calculation, that was an impressive performance. But more particularly with respect of this fund, if you look at their prospectuses, they say of this portfolio, and I quote this verbatim, the diversified financial assets portfolio provides a significant return on investment and contributes to the improved liquidity position and the credit rating of Auckland Council. So there we go, significant return on investment, improved liquidity and improved credit rating. Three out of three. A rather different scenario, I would suggest, than the bleak picture of the DFA's future under the present regime. That was the professionals that were managing our fund, our CCO. And as I understand the CCOs, they were set up because of the expertise that they brought to their various areas of concern. Their expertise was to do with managing funds such as this DFA. And their comments on its importance and its aid to Council's financial position couldn't have been much clearer than that. Now, as I said, we're getting told quite a different picture, you know, a picture where we are led to believe that in divesting ourselves of this portfolio, this is going to somehow be a better outcome, into the generic field of infrastructure. What infrastructure? Yeah. What specific projects are earmarked? The 100 million that's gone, what infrastructure did that build? As I understand it, it was into the, you know, the debt ether, just woof, just gone. CRL, it's another 250 million cost that's been added onto it, just like that, from what we're getting told a year ago. Is it going to go into that? Is it all going to go into that? So which infrastructure projects is this tagged to that we know in advance? A little bit like the interim transport levy. Which projects did that go into? Does anyone know? I know, Councillor Darby, it's a rhetorical question, Mr. Chair.
Well, we're actually past the question time. This is debate and opinion.
It's a rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is a linguistic device that can be used in debate. Okay? It's not a real question.
So, Councillor Darby, you wanted to ask...
No, I said it's a rhetorical question. I don't need him to answer it.
They don't have a rhetorical answer.
The truth, get in the way of a good rhetorical question.
They're around looking for an answer.
Don't take a teacher on.
No.
No.
So what I'm
union.
Attempting to move towards by way of conclusion, Mr. Chair, is is a scenario whereby this fund, and as Councillor Fletcher duly observed in her questioning, which had been set aside by our predecessors, a substantial sum of money, an asset, dare I say it, a strategic asset to provide for our infrastructure in the future, and no doubt accumulated at some cost with some effort, is just going to be gone in this council in a little over a year. $40 million, woof, just gone. 100 million of it's gone already. It was meant to be managed over 3 years. Now it's going to get looted in a little over a year. We're getting told it's infrastructure. Infrastructure, that's the catchphrase for everything now. We don't know what infrastructure, though. We're just going to have to rest assured it is going to be some valuable infrastructure. I would have thought it might have been desirable to know exactly what it's been tagged to in advance. That's not happening. It goes against the backdrop where the professionals who are administering the fund have told us in their prospectuses, which I assume have a degree of credibility to them, that this fund was incredibly valuable for both return, for credit writing and for liquidity. So in light of all those factors, Mr Chair, I think this fund, or what remains of it, should be retained. And I think that would be the message that would be echoed by Aucklanders if they'd ever been given a chance to comment on this, which of course they weren't. So I'll be voting against it.
Right, we'll just get John to clarify one thing, but my understanding is, Councillor Fletcher, you could reinforce this, that the Northern Busway or whatever, that wasn't built on the interest, that was built on divesting some of that fund to build that? Or was it built on the interest?
The way that Infrastructure Auckland administered the funds, there was interest, but there were also the expenditure of some of the capital.
Okay, so they were realising the funds over those years in order to build infrastructure, is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Right. John, could you just also confirm one other thing there, because John was a little bit of a pejorative comment there about the running of the portfolio by yourself and the council team. Could you just reinforce what you said 15, 20 minutes ago, that it's run by exactly the same managers, etc., etc.?
Yeah, look, yes, just through you, Chair, just reconfirm. It's managed in exactly the same way, exactly the same group of fund managers and investment advisors. So the return that we're generating now is linked to the markets. It's not linked in any way to a change in responsibility for it from ACIL to Auckland Council. Just another couple of points as well, just to clarify that credit rating point of view. Now, the reason that report said that it helped the credit rating was because it was supporting liquidity. Now, if we're adding to our standbys, which is supporting liquidity, it's that liquidity which is supporting the credit rating. It's not the fact that we actually have a portfolio of bonds and stocks that supports the credit rating. The other thing to bear in mind is this: if we do use this for infrastructure investment, all we're really doing in reality is swapping one asset, so an asset of financial assets, for another assets, which is presumably roads, water, that sort of thing.
Point of order, Mr Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt the officer. I thought we're in debate now, and to have a circumstance where the officer is almost acting as an advocate here, I don't think that's appropriate.
No, I just asked him to reinforce something that you...
We'd finished questions. I thought we'd finished
Do your own debating, Mr Chairman.
Yeah.
So we have Councillor Sayers. Thank you, John.
Is that a rhetorical question?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just a bit of clarification, John. If we create $130 million of extra headroom now, are we able to apply that 2.7 back in terms of future borrowings, or have we only created the 130 million?
No, through you, Chair, how it will work in reality, if you have, say, we free up 100 million of the diversified asset portfolio, in simple terms, because that was earning a return in the long run of 7%, you multiply that 7% times 100 million is 7 million, times that by 2.7, you get around 17 million. You'll free up debt capacity of roughly sort of 83 to 85 million.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And probably my other question was more of an open question, just picking up on the points of Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Watson. in terms of the opportunity perhaps of ring fencing this in terms of the recommendations to public transport or stormwater? Just an open question, Mr Chair.
So I have Councillor Cashmore, Casey, Hulse, Fletcher, Quacks. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr Chair, and thanks, John, for the presentation. It's potentially a contentious issue, but we've actually already been down this track for the past 18 months or more anyway. The fund started substantially higher than where it was, and it was a fund, as Councillor Fletcher said, that was for the investment for the benefit of Aucklanders going forward. Historically, we are now facing population growth of record proportions. We haven't seen that for this sort of population growth in this city's history. The return on the investment currently sits net of all charges, means it's absolutely just about flat-lining. And the released funds, it is an asset swap. We are going to get investment into the critical things that we need in the city. And because of that high population growth, it will be infrastructure. Aucklanders want better PT. They want better bus services, they want better arterial roads, and they want cleaner water. And so do we all. By holding on to a fund for historical reasons that is not returning any great sufficiency, that potentially without expending it, the cost of not using that money, in other words, the opportunity cost of not using that money is far greater than any return from it, makes holding on completely nonsensical. And you will remember, councillors who were around this table the last term when we did the long-term plan and the interim transport levy, there was a red line through the project list that said this is as far as we can go. There was a red line. And the interim transport levy enabled that red line to fall down the page and enabled another $523 million worth of projects be delivered over 3 years. And there was some project in every ward, and I can't remember the list, but it's still in my office. Every ward received some sort of gain. $523 million. This sort of fund is what we need to help release our assets to provide meeting that opportunity cost and to help solve some of the issues that we have facing the city with growth, with lack of investment from the past, a deficit of investment that we're still playing catch up with, and will also enable us to present a solid face of proactivity in projects. I would suggest that to not divest this fund for historical or emotional reasons would be a dereliction of duty. And we need to actually be front-footing the growth that the city got and taking the opportunity that comes with that growth.
Councillor Casey.
This fund belongs to the people of Auckland. I don't hear from the people of Auckland that they want this fund to be hawked off. I haven't heard a single person tell me that we should be selling down a revenue earning asset. And I'm looking at you, John, but you're just my focal point, right? I haven't heard anybody tell me that. In fact, quite the opposite. I think the people of Auckland are quite nervous at the moment. We've got Michael Burnett in today's paper saying that we should sell off the port and water care. We've got the Auckland Airport shares, which Ernst & Young and Cameron Partners would love to see us get rid of. This isn't on a strategic asset register, which means we don't have a due obligation to consult with the people of Auckland. But we have a moral obligation to the people of Auckland.
Point of order, Mr Chairman.
Every time.
Well, I think your characterisation of
It's not a
EY
point of order.
and Cameron Partners...
That's what he does.
What's the point of order?
Fictitious points of order to put me off my stride.
No.
You shouldn't do it, Dick.
I think the language is...
That's not a point of order either.
Knock it all.
We'll let it flow a bit. Let it flow.
It's a debating point, not
Okay.
a point of order.
Well
Councillor
done.
Casey.
I'll start again, shall I?
You only got 5 minutes, Cameron.
This fund belongs to the people of Auckland. I don't see the public benches there filled with people clamouring for us to sell down a revenue-earning asset. That's the point of the airport shares. That's the point of the port. It earns us money year on year on year. We should not be playing cash converters with public assets, strategic or otherwise. And it's only not on the strategic assets register because we were too stupid to not to put it on there. I can't even remember when we decided what were strategic assets and what weren't. But for absolute sure, I want to look at that strategic asset register now and make sure everything that should be on it is on it. Because I tell you what, the feeling right now is if it ain't nailed down, it's going to go to the highest bidder or the lowest bidder, but it's certainly going to go out the window. And that's what worries me immensely about this. $130 million we're about to hawk off. We're about to, in less than 10 minutes. $130 million is a lot of money, it's an asset, it's a lot of money to be hawking off on, I'm lost. Thanks, Dick. One of these times I would really like to start a speech and finish it without that. Maybe come back to me, because there's a few other points I wanted to make. Would you allow that?
I will allow that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Hulse.
I don't write them down, Dick, it just comes off the top, and you do it every time.
Yeah, that's not fair.
It's not.
Is it my turn?
Point of order, Mr Chair.
No.
Another one. Another one.
Point of order, Mr
What
Chairman.
number of point of order is it?
Point of order, Mr.
What
Chairman.
number is it?
It is up to the chair to determine
That's
whether
not
the
a
point of order is
Chair.
legitimate,
That is a
not from Councillor Lee or Councillor Casey.
Linda.
Councillor Quacks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For the standing orders.
Councillor Hulse.
You're the chair.
Gets to decide. Thank you, Mr Chair. This was always going to be something that kind of raised the energy levels, but I'd like to take us back to the real issue, which is what this fund is all about. And I agree with John Watson. We need to be very clear on why we're doing this, and I'm very, very clear on why we're doing this. We basically have a huge amount of need, and we've got no debt headroom within which to operate the city at its full capacity. We've got stormwater problems that our community, that's what they're clamouring about. People don't want poo on the beaches in Mission Bay. They don't want Cox's Creek in the state that it's in. They don't want the signs going up in Takapuna and in Piha. People want us to simply fix these issues. And I don't see the benches full of people telling us not to sell down this investment portfolio. Mostly people are telling us to simply get on and fix Auckland. Can we please have swimmable beaches, creeks that you can feel proud of, and harbours that are sustainable for future generations? And that's what this fund is for. I think we're making a meal out of the politics of this, and I'm very concerned that we're somehow conflating the sale of the airport shares, the port and water care, for God's sake, into this discussion. That's nonsense. I'll be out on the streets protesting against the sale of water care. I can tell you I think that's a ridiculous thing for anyone even to float. So let's not be diverted. This is simply what this fund was for. As Councillor Fletcher said, it's to deal to infrastructure. I can tell you exactly what Waitakere spent its portion of the Infrastructure Auckland funding on, and thank you very much to those people who were involved. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. That money was well spent, and we're still seeing the benefits of it. It's a dereliction of our duty not to face up to the infrastructure needs in the city. We've upzoned Auckland. Our brownfields areas in particular need our investment. We're working through the HIF fund and other things to deal with some of our greenfields. Our brownfields desperately need our investment because they're the areas that we need to be looking at building in first. And it's this infrastructure funding that's going to be available to deal to those. So, Mr Chair, I have no problem in voting for this. I think it's actually my job to get on and fix Auckland, and when we're severely constrained by our financial ability to do so, we need to look at everything that's available to us. I think we are constructing mythology around this fund It's simply there to do a job. We've got the standby fund if we desperately need something in an emergency. We need to build the right assets to build a good city for future generations. And I think it's an exceedingly narrow-minded view of the world to save money in the bank while the family starves. I think we need to deal with now and keep an eye on the Auckland that we're leaving for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hulse, Councillor Fletcher.
Gosh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just revisit further, just so people really understand this fund, because I think if we had actually left it named as the Infrastructure Auckland Fund, there wouldn't be the controversy that appears to be around the table today. But it dates back to 1996. As Minister, we put through the capital depreciation requirements for local government. 1997, we were looking at the assets of the Auckland Regional Council. That was Phil Warren as the chair at that time. And a Treasury officer leaked to me a report that the government were going to do a share giveaway on those. And there had been a lot of controversy. Auckland was misunderstood, as it remains 20 years later. I resigned, so I put myself on the back bench so that I could actually cross the floor, because as a Cabinet Minister you could not cross the floor of the House, although I note that subsequently some have, but there was a convention you didn't do that. And to date, that remains the only government bill in history that was lost. So that fund was set up. Part of it was put into the Art Regional Fund, which has enabled quite a lot of initiatives in terms of art. And the sole purpose of that fund was to fund stormwater and public transport, not roads. It was stormwater and public transport. So if you look across Auckland, it was designed before we talked about partnerships. I'd actually been the beneficiary of a British government public-private partnerships program, and I'd spent a month in the UK looking at the opportunities, and I knew that we needed seeding funds. So it was designed to encourage partnerships, and those funds were used in a lot of really creative ways. I've already highlighted the North Shore Busway, but you wouldn't have got Britomart off the ground, Twin Streams, which we've heard about. So here we are 20 years on. We rename things and nobody's got a clue what they were intended for, but it was solely intended for the building of infrastructure in Auckland. And yes, today we're getting 142 people coming in. We've had 174,000 since amalgamation. I can see the need for that infrastructure. So as the sort of mother, if you like, of that fund, I feel particularly strongly about the fact, as long as those funds are being directed in terms of their original purpose, having had the privilege of sitting on the board of Auckland Transport and fighting for you for the EMUs and integrated ticketing and so forth, I could go on and on and on, we have still got so much more to do in terms of gating, in terms of grade separation, and I could go on and on and on about that. But they are the things that the public have been clamouring for us to get on and do. Now, in Officer's report, this is clearly a case of deficiency. No offence to the officer present. But the fact that you don't know the history, the fact that you didn't articulate that it was designed there for the building of infrastructure, if it had been presented in such a way, I think everyone would have supported it unanimously, which is why I'm going to support it. I can see the need in Auckland. The business case, the project prioritisation tools, everything that we know now that's led up to ATAP, we need to be able to move forward. These funds are going to provide part of that. So I don't see it as giving away the family silver. It's just reinvesting in some solid gold. And we need to do that if Auckland's going to go ahead. So I would encourage everyone to vote for this today, but I would encourage officers to know the history to these funds and for them to be presented in such a way that the public can understand what the purpose of the funds were in the first place, because it would have perhaps alleviated some of the confusion that we're seeing.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Quacks, who's now here. Speeding towards the tape.
A minute going.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see this is quite an emotional issue for some councillors, and but it's not for me. And I think Councillor Hulse probably put it most eloquently, because for better or for worse, this council is an infrastructure provider, and I don't think that this $100 million that was taken out of the fund prior, somebody might put me correct here, but it wasn't looted, as has been suggested. So, and I'd like to also say that I don't believe that EY and Cameron Partners would love to see us sell assets. I think they gave us some advice, which we can take or we can discard. But I don't think they ever said that they would love to see us, or anybody said that they would love to see us sell these assets. But can I just say that last night, Councillor Stewart and I were at the local board meeting, and there was a group of people there from what's known as the Liston catchment. They, as a result of storms and as a result of intensification in that Liston catchment, the streams down there is eroding to such an extent that people are in danger of losing their houses. Infrastructure has not been provided to cope with the extra housing, the extra population in that area. And that's the same, that's just an isolated case. The same is happening all over this region. And we need to understand that we need to provide infrastructure. The growing population has been referred to by both Councillors Cashmore and Councillor Hulse, is placing stress on the infrastructure that we have, but it's also a requirement for new infrastructure. So if we weren't in a cash-constrained situation, and if our balance sheet was a healthy balance sheet, I'd probably say perhaps it's a reasonable thing to have this portfolio. But we are not in that happy position. We're in a position of being cash constrained. We're in a position of providing, not being able to provide the infrastructure that we desperately need. So I'm happy to see us sell this down. I think that if you look at this as a family, it'd be like the family living in the back of a car and having $1 million in the bank, because that's exactly the way this is at the moment. We need money desperately to provide for the Auckland family. We're not doing that, and it would be irresponsible of us not to use this fund to pay for the infrastructure that we desperately need, that the people in the Liston catchment need, that the people in New Lynn need, that the people all over this region need. And that is what we are here for. For better or for worse, we are infrastructure providers, and we need to provide infrastructure.
Councillor Quacks. Councillor Lee. Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's a sad day for me to see this diversified asset fund was a legacy handed down by the former Auckland Regional Council, and what was in that fund was created by Aucklanders long since gone. It was an infrastructure fund, as some members have pointed out, and intelligently managed, and with judicious grants, it enabled the North Shore Busway, it enabled the Britomart Transport Centre, and most of all, and the thing that I had most to do with because of this fund, the rebuilding of Auckland's metro rail system, which was on the brink of extinction, to what it is today. Now, under the management of ACL, the report says that the fund earned 9.1% per annum. In the appendix, it's talking about 12.1%, but whatever, it performed very, very, very well indeed. It's now down to 5.8%, which is disappointing, given market conditions in New Zealand and around the world the last year or so. However, we can only speculate why that happened, and I offer that perhaps what has already been stripped out were probably some of the best earners, but I don't know. We don't have any information on that. But the key point here, as Simon Allen reminded me, is this fund earns more than what we pay in debt, and to spend it down is actually deliberately destroying value, which members, councils should not do. There's another aspect to this which unfortunately hasn't been touched on by the report. The report talks a lot about our debt and about credit rating and debt limits, but it doesn't make the very important point that having these diversified income earning assets actually is a tick for the credit ratings. In any credit rating organisation, removing them is the opposite. It weakens our credit rating. That's not rocket science for Aucklanders. They understand that, and members around the table should understand that. They should also understand to be very sceptical of talk about it's only an asset swap. The first point, as Councillor Watson pointed out, is we haven't seen what the spend up has produced over the last year. There's been no report on where that money actually went in terms of infrastructure or assets. But you cannot equate an asset that earns money, especially earns money offshore, not from Aucklanders so much, but from the international market. You can't equate that and say it's an asset swap. We know what it is. We don't know what was swapped, if anything, and call it a swap when the assets that we are buying cost money, lose money, year on year, and that's the reason why these assets cost so much is a whole separate discussion. So what we are doing is taking away an alternative stream of income from this council, not just now, but forever. So let's take the CRL, which is an essential piece of infrastructure, an essential asset, one of the great achievements of Len Brown and the early Auckland Council. That's going to cost, last time I heard, about $30 million a year to operate. Where's that money going to come from? That's equivalent to a 2% rates increase. So, you know, we are actually asset stripping. If we are really, I've heard a lot about infrastructure, and I think members are of a mind and in agreement that we do need to invest in infrastructure, even though it will cost. But wouldn't it be more intelligent? Wouldn't it be more financially smart to actually retain those assets and augment the offshore income with the dividend streams from Ports of Auckland and Auckland Airport, and call it a real infrastructure fund and guard it as such and manage it judiciously as such and build our infrastructure from it? I recall our debate over the targeted rate affair, which is meant to bring in 13 million, which will be the core of the Mayor's infrastructure fund. And he points out that it's not just the 13 million. You can borrow, maybe 100 million with that 13 million, which is true. But how about the diversified assets with their income and that asset base and the port and the airport? Now you're talking seriously about infrastructure. If you are fair dinkum about infrastructure, removing or destroying this asset base, I think is not only financially imprudent, but also there's a moral question here. Those assets were handed down to us. It's our moral right to manage them as efficiently and prudently as possible, then hand on that income stream to future Aucklanders. What I'm concerned about is that history will find us guilty, this council, willfully guilty of intergenerational theft. Thank you.
It'd be worse if we don't build the infrastructure, won't it?
Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure about intergenerational theft. If this was a fund set up as an infrastructure fund and the proceeds from the divestment of the fund is to repay debt to enable us to borrow so that we can create more infrastructure, that's not theft. That's a sensible thing for this council to do. We're not talking about strategic assets here. We're talking about shares and bonds. As far as I know, it's not part of the core role of council to be an investment banker. We could, if we like, borrow, buy more shares and bonds and say we're making a good financial return, but I don't think I've ever been approached by a constituent that says they want Auckland Council to buy more shares and bonds and not to invest in infrastructure. I know what the constituents I deal with on a daily and weekly basis are saying to me. They say council has to get on and do what it can to invest in the infrastructure we need for more homes and better transport systems. I have no emotional attachment to shares and bonds whatsoever. I disagree strongly with Cameron Partners about saying let's just hock off the actual infrastructure assets, the strategic assets. They are Watercare. They are Auckland International Airport Limited. Nobody ever described shares and bonds as a strategic asset. And yeah, look, they were a reasonable investment while they were waiting there to be used for a purpose for which Auckland Council could use them. They were getting 9.1%. The market's come down. It's now 5.8%. If we have an international event or if we have a downturn, it may be in the negative. We may start losing on it. That's what happens with shares and bonds. We're not in the business of being investment bankers. We are in the business of building infrastructure for this city. This council has already made the decision to divest itself of 2/3 of this fund. It did that the year before last and last year. We're now talking about the remnants of a fund for which we spend 1.5 million a year in administrative costs. Interest rates, people have said, oh, look, you get more off the return on this than interest rates. Interest rates are at an historic low. But read your document here, and your document says the long-term plan sets interest rates at 6%. That's actually more than the return we're getting on these shares and bonds. And if there's a downturn, don't we need this fund for liquidity purposes? The trouble, if there is a downturn, then the value goes out of the very things that you're relying on for liquidity support. The value will go right out of them at the very time you need to liquefy them. They'll be hard to liquefy because nobody's buying and everybody's selling. Far better to have the more sensible way of a standby facility in terms of providing for that. So I have no problem at all with selling shares and stocks in order to pay down debt, to give us that extra ability subsequently to borrow without hitting the debt to revenue ratios. I also have a problem if I go back to our constituents and say, I want to rate you more, and they say, why? Oh, I want to invest in some more shares and bonds. I know what they'd tell me. They'd say, you've got your job wrong. You've got your priorities wrong. If I go to... No, this actually isn't to be interrupted. This is my little space of time. If I go to government, and I'm going to government constantly, and I'm saying, listen, you guys, we need more revenue sources, which we do, and we need more revenue sharing, which we do. We need to invest desperately because we've got an ATAP deficit of $7 billion. And when I do that, I do it in good faith. But if they come back to me and say, hang on, you had this fund of shares and bonds, you want to keep that to get the revenue off it, but you want us to meet the cost of investment, I'm not sure I have the moral high ground when I go to government on that basis. I think it is, in fact, our Achilles heel. I want to separate this absolutely from the question of AIAL and Watercare. And I want to do that because they are basic strategic assets in monopoly areas that we need to control. And we get a return on it and a much lower rate of risk. So I don't accept the Cameron Partners' logical extension to their argument. We'd sell every bloody thing if we followed that logical extension. But we have no strong grounds for retaining this asset, which is now much diminished, which is costing us more, actually in administrative fees, when we are just about to hit the limit of our debt to revenue ratio. And for those that very kindly mentioned the targeted rate on accommodation, yeah, you're right, it does bring us more ability, Mike, to borrow, which is why I wondered why you voted against that when we had that issue before us. So I think the logical thing to do is to divest ourselves of our shares and bonds, to put it into paying off debt, to put it into CapEx expenditure we are then enabled to make in what our constituents demand of us as our core role and responsibility.
Yeah. I have Councillor Casey, Darby, Stewart, Sayers and Hills, but I'll just draw everyone's attention to a new C which the mover has agreed to be added, and that's been wordsmithed by Councillor Sayers. And Councillor Cooper, you're happy with C to go in there?
Mr Chairman, I'm very happy because if you look in the report, points 21, 26, 27 all deal with the fact that it's accelerating infrastructure investment, and that's what the resolution is saying. It talks all the time. It's all about infrastructure investment. That's the purpose.
Councillor Cooper, you're happy with that to go?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so Councillor Casey.
Can I just raise a point of order on that, Mr Chairman? Does that mean that we could not use the proceeds of these shares and bonds to actually repay debt? That indirectly then allows us to do that, but I just want to make sure, I want to clarify what that Resolution C means.
Is the second of that...
Matthew, thank you.
Through the chair, so let me give some clarity. So in a situation where we sell down, or we were to sell down the final 130 million on the day of that transaction, we'd have 130 million of cash. To give effect to this resolution, which we're quite comfortable with in terms of how we can operationalise that, we would effectively, if you like, create a reserve fund. Mm-hmm. That means we could only draw down on that fund to support public transport and stormwater projects. On day one, in the act of creating that fund and the Treasury having that cash on our balance sheet, net debt does reduce. Council's debt does go down, and you're then you're in a position where that reserve fund is able to support infrastructure investment in these categories.
That's fine. That's a good explanation.
Councillor Casey, you...
There was only one point that I didn't make when Dick interrupted me rudely, and that was that there's a lot of talk today about what is core business of Auckland Council. The Mayor mentioned it. Ernst & Young and Cameron Partners tell us that this is not our core business, so we shouldn't be going near it. Well, actually, our core business as Auckland Council is the prudent management of public assets. Selling off the family silver is not prudent management of public assets. And I should add revenue-earning public assets, because that doesn't seem to come up a lot today. It brings in money. It has done more or less over the years. So that's all I wanted to say. That is our core business. And it's not up to some tin pot consultant to tell us what is and is not our core business.
So just so we're quite clear about those reports, we will be having workshops on those reports in August, which will be on the way to informing the LTP. So that's when we will have the discussion on those reports and whether we enact or do anything further on the advice in those reports. So, Councillor Darby.
Mr. Chair, point of clarification around standing orders, please. Councillor Casey has now spoken twice to this item.
Yeah,
and
Quacks,
the standing orders are quite clear around the number of times that a member can speak to an item in the committees of the whole.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This issue's been ruled on by yourself.
That's what I'm about to say, is that I'm sorry. I felt as though Councillor Casey was upset, and I allowed her to get the chance to speak again, and I think it's worked out well.
Standing orders allow for that.
Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Probably just a clarification still on the C, because the wording I'm not clear on at the moment, and I want to follow this up. The intention, question here, is to pay down debt, to create headroom, to invest in primarily public transport and stormwater infrastructure. I don't think those words say that, though, and I think they need to be worked up to be more specific. It says there to transfer that value directly to public transport. That's just my own opinion, because the intention has got to be really clear here. The second question is, and I should have asked it before we entered debate, is the resolutions give effectively 10 calendar days to sell down the fund of 130 million?
18. We put in 2018 so that...
Oh, sorry, 18.
So that these calculations
my error.
Go into the LTP, so when they come back with the budget figures, that would be in there even if we haven't sold it, but the assumption would be there that it could be or would be. Yeah.
My error. Look, just speaking in support, originally when this came up, and I think we first discussed this possibility about 3 years ago, I was not in support of selling down this fund. I raised concern about how we were insulated from a major disaster. We subsequently had discussions about a captive insurance scheme that was ultimately deemed quite inefficient. Coincidentally, we're discussing more efficient means of how we might insure ourselves on our public excluded agenda today. In renewing our insurances and through our workshops, and I've learned that we are better covered in that space. So in some ways I am much more comfortable in the course that we've navigated over the last couple of years in understanding this. So I'm supporting this today, Chair, because I'm confident that, in my view, we have addressed the risks. And we haven't rushed into this. We haven't rushed to hock off something, as a member has suggested. We've actually considered it in a comprehensive way over a very long period. It is not just a 2-day decision. But, of course, you need to come to a 2-day decision. One of the things that concerned me was just how we were covered in terms of liquidity support, and we've had the answer to that today. And that is one of the principal requirements of this fund. That's what it's there for, to offer liquidity support. So we've been told there is other means of liquidity support being provided through extension of the $900 million standby facility. And then the fund is also there to meet unforeseen events. And I guess the unforeseen event, no, it's not. It's been coming at us, but I think we've finally got to understand and grab the missions critical that are facing us in public transport and housing. Inextricably linked, at the hip, they are one and the same, and ask any Aucklander what they want us to invest in, and I'm sure 95% of them will say without hesitation, please address public transport and housing. It's desperate. And that's where we will see, even though housing is not mentioned there in the C, the public transport links it to addressing, enabling housing development. So I'm absolutely comfortable, Mr. Chair. After, I think, 3 years discussing this, where we've arrived at here is the right place. It is not hocking off 100, it's actually 130. It is transferring the value of that to where we critically need it in public transport infrastructure and housing. There was a rhetorical question, and of course we can always answer rhetorical questions when it's our speaking turn, can't we? And I do want to just have a look at where that interim transport levy went. And if members are not aware of it, we actually won handsomely in the interim transport levy allocation. We're just about to break 90 million public transport passenger journeys. That interim transport levy sought an additional 1.8 million. We've actually surpassed it. We've invested in, Councillor Watson, for your benefit, Silverdale bus station park and ride. Really? That was part of it. Yeah. There was some 600 new bus stops. That was part of it. 45 kilometres of bus lanes, 42 kilometres of the cycle network, the strategic cycle network. Look, I won't bore you with the rest, but the list goes on. But I think it is fair to say that, and I will follow this up, Councillor Watson, I think we should get a status report on the interim transport levy delivery. And so that is a fair question, and for the Planning Committee, I'll follow up on that. But that was a risk at the time, but boy, did we make the right call in that space. Imagine Auckland right now if we had not have invested 2 years ago in a big boost in public transport. And they were significant numbers as well. We went from 43 million to 213 million in the public transport space. Imagine if we didn't do that. Imagine the gridlock out there on motorways and public transport platforms that there would be. Auckland would be furious with us if we just stood by and did not act at that time. We have acted. Now we have another opportunity to act, and we must act and invest this money in the right place.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I'm actually going to support this now that I see that C is there, especially when I can see that it's for public transport and stormwater infrastructure in particular. And just picking up on what Councillor Quacks was talking about, last night, yes, we did have a delegation of people from the Liston catchment and Howick, the older part of Howick. Howick has had decades of, and other parts of the region, of not having infrastructure upgraded. And if some of you could see what is happening in the Liston catchment, the stormwater that's going through that catchment is coming from most of the older part of Howick, and it's actually causing some really, really serious erosion problems. And after listening to what Councillor Fletcher said about this had actually been set up really for infrastructure, and picking up on Councillor Penny Hulse on the rainy day, I think the rainy day has come. We're having, as far as stormwater events are concerned, we're having more and more of those. We've got another one on its way, apparently. In a few days' time, we're going to have another big event in probably Auckland. And if you were one of those people in the Liston catchment and you could see your house eroding into the stream because of all the other, because of the water that is coming from everybody else's property, and we haven't kept up with the infrastructure, I think
now is the time to do it. But just one thing, I will support Councillor Casey and Councillor Mike Lee on the airport shares. It's something that I wouldn't like to see sold. If Manukau City and Auckland City had sold those shares all those years ago, this Auckland Council today wouldn't be as in the place that it's in right now. So I will be supporting this. I can see where other people are coming from, but I think at the moment the rainy day is here, and if you were one of the people that was suffering like the people in the Liston catchment, you would expect us to do something about the decades of no catch-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Sayers, Hills and Councillor Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I did want to thank the Auckland Council Treasurer, Mr Bishop, for presenting this paper today and fielding the questions, so thank you for that. What it boils down to me, there's two very key strategic objectives for Auckland Council. One is to reduce its debt and one is to get back to core business. And so by voting in this resolution today, that's what we'll be doing. We'll be reducing the debt and creating the ability to deliver core council services. So I will totally support this resolution 100%. The other thing I want to support 100% is really the words of Councillor Fletcher, and that's the reason for number C up there. That may require some modification, but I think it's very important, and thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for pointing out the historical reasons of how this fund came into existence. And I think by earmarking it for the purposes that it was intended to, I hope that acknowledges that, and I just want to support that to the maximum capability that I can today, Mr Chair. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just quickly, I'll be supporting the resolutions. I am opposed to the sale of strategic assets. I think things, like even mentioning selling water would be ridiculous for any city, with water being such a public good, and things like the airport shares in the port and those the fact that we should have some say in the incomes coming in from those things is extremely important to this council. But a lot of numbers are being thrown around about what we used to have. I wasn't part of the council who voted to sell down the other parts of the asset pool, but at the moment we've got 130 million. We're earning 5.8, but even if you go to the LTP, that's 9.1 million, but the 6% interest is 7.8 million. That leaves us 1.3, and then we spend 1.5 actually administering it. So we're actually down 200,000 a year based on the LTP on this small amount of money. So I don't think this should be as divisive as it is. I think we need to free up this capital in this sense to invest in the infrastructure that people expect us to. That's the only thing I'm getting feedback on constantly on social media and public, getting yelled at Takapuna markets, other things, is about investing in infrastructure. And we need to do that now. We can't just keep waiting around. The government and other people are clearly pushing us to sell more important things, but we need to use every single lever and every single thing to show them that we are making every decision possible to raise funds and to fund our assets, so then they will hopefully fund more of our assets and give us more funding tools. So I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. We've got Councillor John Walker.
Thank you. Many years ago, I was a defender of the airport shares in Manukau City, and thank goodness I was. And thank goodness the council had more sense then, because at the end of the day, that asset's grown up to a share today where it's quite phenomenal, and it's money for jam, basically. Auckland City Council sold all their shares off at $3 when they were cleaning up their act and trying to get out of debt. They remained out of debt for a very short period of time, and now they're back in debt. But common sense says, if you've got a lot of money sitting there and you need to spend it elsewhere, it doesn't say you should have it in stocks and shares. Because stocks and shares are very vulnerable. At the moment, it's an all-time high. on all stock markets, but all-time high, can get to an all-time loss too. So I'll be supporting the selling of the shares to fund infrastructure, because at the end of the day, if we don't, Auckland City is going to be in terrible trouble. I mean, I come on that motorway every day. It takes me an hour and a half to 2 hours to drive in, 2 hours at night. I mean, it's disgusting. I'd rather spend it here rather than sitting in a car. So for that, I support the selling of the shares.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'm not going to make any comments. I just actually want to pass a reference to thanks way back to Bruce Jesson, who was actually the first politician leading that investment fund. And ironically, Mark Ford was the first chief executive of that fund for several years, and they consolidated it. And as Councillor Fletcher will know, they actually fought off the demand that the whole thing get washed up and distributed by the national government at that time. So it survived and it evolved and then obviously subsequently got invested. So I'd just like to, for the public record, just to mention and thank Bruce Jesson and Mark Ford and those others at the ARC at the time. So does the mover want to have the right to reply, or?
Oh, look, I'll just keep it very brief. I think everyone said it. I want to also thank Mr Bishop. I think when the Treasurer and General Manager of our financial services struggles to find a reason to keep it, the paper speaks for itself. I think that reducing debt, creating the ability to deliver core council services, particularly transport and stormwater, is something that we are desperately short of. It's tidying up our balance sheet. It's a sensible thing to do, and it will save us a further $1.5 million per year that goes to some share broker. Sorry, Mr. Share Broker, whoever you are. But it's an extra saving from that perspective as well, and we've just got to be financially prudent and get on with the job and deliver what Auckland's asking for and what Auckland needs. So thank you.
Sorry, Mr Chair, just a point of information. Councillor Darby said he's coming back with information in terms of the transport levy. Could we also have some report back or information back as to what are the assets that the government is demanding that we sell as a show of good faith? Because that's been repeated a number of times by speakers. I don't know what they are, so I'd appreciate knowing what those assets are that they're asking us to
It was just on
dispose
Q&A in the Nation.
Well, it's a recurring comment we hear, Mr Chair.
Yep, and that will come back in July, August, where we were discussing as part of the whole portfolio review, etc., LTP. So I'm going to put the resolution. Does people
By
want it?
division.
By division, yep.
Councillor Clow?
Yes.
Councillor Casey?
No.
Councillor Cashmore?
Yes.
Councillor Collins?
No.
Councillor Cooper?
Yes.
Councillor Darby?
For.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes.
Mayor Goff?
Yes.
Councillor Hills?
Yes.
Councillor Hulse?
Aye.
Councillor Mike Lee?
No.
Councillor Quacks?
Yes.
Councillor Sayers?
Yes.
Councillor Simpson?
For.
Councillor Stewart?
Yes.
Member Taipari?
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker?
Yes.
Councillor Wayne Walker?
No.
Councillor Watson?
No.
Okay, so that is carried by 14-5. Thank you, and thank you, folks. That was really quite a good debate, and appreciate the courtesy shown to everyone. We're actually going to have a 5-minute break at this stage because it's a natural break. I know it's not 2 hours, but we're going to have a 5-minute break now because we're clean between that item. And we have John. John's coming back up or no? Yeah?
The driest councillor.
I'm sure we don't.
Let me take a photo here, Greg.
So on item 10, folks, and
Councillor Sayers lunch.
fairly perfunctory, but we'll have speaking to it.
Through Mr. Chair, I'll take it as the report has been read. Just to say that this is an administrative function to convert establishment loans of Panuku to equity. Bear in mind it has no cash impact, no rates impact, or no tax impact. So it is just trying to sort out the books at year end, and it's strictly administrative. Happy to take any questions.
Just under the Maori impact statement, that might have been picked up from a previous report. That's not exactly correct, is it?
No surprise. Yes, that's true.
So we'll just note that error in the paper there. So that was relating to the ethical investments. So. Right, we have. Wayne, Councillor Walker.
Sure, just a pretty simple question. Do we have any notional interest on debt between our intercompany operations?
Yes, there is. We charge them an interest rate, which in turn we have to pay them to get paid back to us. So it's just administrative.
So wouldn't there be an advantage around this? Because surely there will be accounting and taxation issues around the interest?
Yeah, we've because of the group tax arrangement, that's why we got tax advice on it, which says that there is no tax impact at all. It just causes a lot of administrative issues just around it. We have got tax advice on it, which says it really has no benefit at all.
Okay, well, there's actually no other speakers. I'm happy to move. Moved by
Happy
Councillor
to second.
Fletcher, seconded by myself. Further questions? I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Okay, the motions, I should say. Thank you. Right, we have item 11, which is the budget update. Robert? And we got Nicola. Nicola coming? Just you, Robert?
Yep.
Okay. Brent, are you here for this item? Did you want to speak?
If you'd like me to, yes, I can.
Or do you just want to come up to the table and if you did want to speak and then you can go back again, so to speak? All right. Is there anything you want to say?
Look, this item is long overdue. We've been waiting for this since Papakura District Council days when the original concept was put in place and the funding was initiated then. The one disappointment with it, I suppose, is that because of the limited funds, we have had to accept the third of the options rather than the original, our preferred option, which was number one. But hey, due to funding constraints, an extra $1 million from the council would have helped. But we understand that the size of it is limited by the funds, and we are very delighted to be able to provide this service in Takanini. Takanini is a hugely growing area. 5 years ago, it was just a very small grouping of houses around Bruce Pullman Park with the Addison development. It's now got 2 new schools that have opened up in the area, and plans to expand very, very rapidly. So this is a crucial piece of the infrastructure within the Papakura Local Board area, and particularly in Takanini.
Well, it certainly is a good news story, I think, anyway. So, yours.
Yes, so through the Chair, this is just one item on the monthly budget update report. So as the Chair from Papakura said, it relates to the Takanini multi-purpose facility. What we're seeking is approval to convert 3.1 million of the 6 million CapEx into an annualised operating budget. That's 2018-19, so
We coming forward today just to allow the agreement so the council can enter into MOT with the developer around the proposed lease.
Happy to move.
Yep, so I'm happy to second that if there's no other on that, so I'll move in second. So we have Councillor Wayne Walker and then Councillor Cooper.
I can understand the relative advantages of leasing. Having said that, I'm assuming that that what we're looking at here is a long-term asset. It isn't an asset that we own. Do we have an option to purchase at any time as a consequence of the lease contract?
Through the chair, this I guess this deal was done in terms of the site location. It's an owned land. I'm not aware of any ability for us to buy, but it's around the location, and so the council did look at other sites in terms of the traditional own and build option, but this was the preferred site.
I understand that. My question is, do we have an option to purchase at some time? I don't know whether that would be on a strata title basis or whatever. Obviously, it's an important asset. Effectively, it's a long-term asset that the council has got an interest in. And I'm assuming that we would not want to see that asset lost as much and all as we don't own it.
Yep, through the chair, I can find out in terms of future options around whether we have the ability to acquire.
So I'd just put on the record that that's an important question for me, Mr. Chair, in principle.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Cooper.
Hi, there's a couple of questions. One is, so this capital budget would have had to be borrowed. So so really now we're going to borrow that money, but it becomes operational? Is that the case? It's not from rates?
Yeah, so through the chair, effectively what we looked at here is effectively we'll actually have a reduction in borrowings. What we're doing is we looked at the ongoing operational cost that's funded from rates. So we looked at the interest and the funded depreciation, and that converted that to the annualised operating budget. So effectively what we do is we take the $3 million, what we would have borrowed for debt, looked at the ongoing cost of funds and the application of that, and then that was converted that to our operating budget.
So that will last not that long. So then you have to find the operating budget for that, or is it just what you? Yeah.
Through the chair, it's actually it's almost over 20 years, so it ran with the lifespan in terms of the capex.
Okay, so the other thing is we've got Panuku doing service optimisation now, which is effectively if there's something in the local board area that's not fit for purpose can be released and the money used for another service building. Was that option canvassed, which is no cost to the LTP?
No, that wouldn't have applied because it's not a transform sector, so that at the moment is
no,
only...
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
No, at the moment it's only applying to the transform area.
No, I'm sorry, I disagree because they're offering it in Glen Eden and that's not a transform area.
Well, it's different. And then it's going to be a paper coming up to actually where Panuku is saying we want to do the same in the unlocked categories.
Sorry, no, can I just clarify that, Mr. Chairman, because Glen Eden had a presentation the other day that said they could use that mechanism for their own offices as long as it was a service area, which is different. This is not just selling, that's a whole different thing. This is a different lever. This is called service optimisation, where you have a service facility that you don't need anymore. You can sell that and then use that money for another service requirement. So that's what I'm asking, because that would be no cost to the LTP.
Yeah, I heard optimisation, that's all I heard.
So I just want to know, I mean, I just think this is, if there's another option that's no cost to the LTP, wouldn't that be more favourable?
Can you just confirm, just on that, because Matthew's leaning over of interest too, that was done at the Glen Eden...
Yes, which isn't in none of those
At the Waitakere
categories.
Local Board,
Yep.
by someone from the finance team?
Panuku.
Panuku.
Panuku, this is one of the things that we voted for that said there's two tranches. Well, no, the only way that local boards can get money back from sales is if it's a service for service and no cost to the LTP. And I mean, we've probably forgotten about it. I only remembered when we had this presentation, but I think it's actually it was when the local boards came to us and said, look, we'd like some of the money back if we can in our own area, and that was what was agreed. So, I mean, I don't want to undermine this, I know, and you probably worked through it, but I think maybe people have forgotten about that opportunity, which means no cost. I mean, there may be nothing in your ward in your local board area that is surplus to requirements in terms of service, I don't know, but I'd hate to think that we could do this with no cost to the LTP when we're borrowing 3.1 million.
I think Brent would have been onto it if there was something, so...
Well, I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
Well, he's smiling.
Well, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I've asked a question. And I'm not trying to be mean about it, but, you know, have you actually looked at that?
Can I just...
Yep, oh, let Brent and then Matthew.
We've looked at, over the years, we've looked at all sorts of options to try and fund this and get it to the desired size that we wanted, and there was just no other way around it.
But have you used this tool because it's only new? That's what I'm asking you.
I'll get Lisa to talk.
And I'm not here trying to undermine what you've done at all, but if there's this new opportunity...
You're getting some feedback. We're going to have Matthew and then Lisa. It's jumped up.
So through the chair, and I will go to Lisa, but I might just check I can frame it so we understand.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you is, have we had a really good discussion with Panuku about all the options that might be available here? What's on the table is a pretty straightforward arrangement whereby rather than owning the library outright, we get into a lease arrangement. But Lisa, do you want to just pick up on whether in fact there were other useful opportunities, and I also presume there's some practical issues here around how many different things Panuku can actually look at. But
so, in response to that, couple of questions back is one, I think we need to be fairly clear on the policy for optimisation and how that actually works across service-to-service assets. Secondly, for this particular project, in terms of the 9 options for service that we looked at for this area, optimisation wasn't one of them at the time because it preceded a lot of that work. And I've forgotten the third thing. It went straight off my head, Linda.
Also, you can lease, even with optimisation, you can sell but then lease. So, so when you say it precedes it, sorry, Mr. Chairman, you said this work preceded that, but now we're in the now, aren't we? And there's an option. So
So through the chair, we look at optimisation opportunities through either the Panuku catchments or other areas that have come to light, for example, the spatial priority areas. And with this piece of work, it hooks off the back of the Community Facilities Network Plan, and we collaborated with Policy, who led some work on community needs assessment, looked at 9 spaces within that community that this service could be delivered. And what we're focusing really hard on is how do we deliver that service, the service that this community needs and wants, to that community, and looking at kind of options around how we deliver that service through assets. So that's through the work that we've done, the lease option has come out the strongest in terms of the placement of the service in that community. And just for other contexts, we're working with both the local board and the community to look at service design and delivery of those services. But optimisation was not one of the 9 that we looked at.
Mr. Chairman, just because I don't want to leave... This is not about whether this is the right place or how what you want to do. I'm just looking at how... if there's another option to pay for it in a different way that doesn't affect the LTP, wouldn't that be good? I know that kind of slows things down and undermines, but I mean, I support the facility, absolutely, but this option obviously hasn't been looked at because it's something that we voted for in the last LTP, I think, and then we have it's there, and Panuku are doing some work with some people, and if they're asked, I guess, and it's just not a new option. I mean, there may be nothing that you can get rid of in your area, but I just feel it's a little bit derelict of us to say, yes, go ahead and borrow 3.1 million if we possibly didn't need to, and that's my concern.
Get that?
Yeah.
I'm getting the impression, though, from Lisa's initial answer, that that wasn't an option. But anyway, let's clarify further.
That's not what she said. She
Well,
said they didn't look at
well,
that.
I don't know. Well, let's see. Lisa, what did you say?
We need clarity on the policy in terms of when you undertake programs of work to deliver a service in a place like Takanini, that the policy, I need Kat's help here actually, that the policy actually says that one of the fundamentals you have to do is do that optimisation check. What we've done is looked at the Community Facilities Network Plan and the services that were required by that community and looked at the best options to deliver that service. We do work with Panuku on their major optimisation program, and those are large catchments, but not a site-by-site approach. That wasn't taken in this instance. I'm sorry, my questions aren't well formed because we've come in to this fairly new to this project, and I do apologise, but
Please don't apologise. No, Mr. Chairman, I'm not trying to undermine it. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have it. I just think that, and also that it just shows that not many people are familiar with this policy now. So, which is no one's fault. It's just that it's new and it may not have been well, socialised, so to speak.
We'll get a fourth answer.
Just through the chair, I can confirm that we will go and find the policy you're referring to, because that is not how we are currently operating in terms of the options we assess. So if we have missed something, then we're not using those full levels of policy that we may, and that's occurred in this case, and we will need to go back and find those policy decisions and potentially change the way we are framing up options for that.
So you suggested defer.
And it would obviously be useful to find out who made the presentation at Glen Eden to the Waitakere Local Board, which department, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Hang on, I can find that for you. I could check.
All good. Anyone else would like to speak on this item?
Can I just, listening to that discussion, just cold, are we still happy to go ahead with this, or do we need to defer it?
My understanding is no.
The only thing, Mr. Chairman, it will take about a year to work something up like that. So that's, I mean, it may be a missed opportunity.
Okay. We have a mover. We have a seconder. Councillor Watson.
It was just a brief comment in terms of that resolution we passed with respect of service optimisation. My recollection was yes, as Councillor Cooper has said, there was the ability for service property then to be sold to be recouped for a local board. I don't know if it was necessarily all the money, but it was a little vague from memory. But I don't think it went as far as to say that then that would be actively used in instances such as this. So I don't think the necessary conclusion was that if there's something happening, you'll look to do that. It was if properties are identified, service properties that's sold, there would be the opportunity for a local board to use that, as opposed to saying, well, here's a proposal, let's use this service optimisation. I think they're two different things, but that's my recollection anyway of that resolution, which is different.
Yep. Wait a minute, that's still good, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Watson, because we will follow this up and just clarify that we are being consistent across the board, because that's what all the local boards want us to be, as consistent as possible. I put the motion, moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Passed. Thank you. Right, we're now
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brent. Item 12, budget update.
Information report.
Where did I read budget? Oh, it was above that, the line above. Here we go, information.
I'm happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Been moved, good. Moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor Cashmore. No debate, all those in favour?
Aye.
Excellent. Right. There are no extraordinary items, exclusion of the public, so we have a note there of the exceptions that we're allowing to be in here. So I'm not going to read that resolution. It is there in front of you.
I'll move, Mr Chairman.
Yeah, no, we did that.
Moved by councillor Simpson, seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
That was the technical
We will prepare the room and the insurance people must be outside still.